we finally decided to go downstairs, and Bob had, invited me to go in the room with him and Frank Mankiewicz and Fred Dutton of his campaign, and talk over the list of people to be recognized. And we left the room, and Bob on the way down says, look, I understand Cesar Chavez had to leave, but Dolores Huerta is going to be with us on the platform. And but he said, we didn't put her name on the list. Can you do something about that? So I dropped out and went to a room, picked up a piece of paper and wrote her name down. They had already gone down the elevator. Well, a couple of guys I was working with, we ran down the stairs from the 5th floor, actually caught up with him in the kitchen where he was being greeted, Viva Kennedy, Kennedy for Presidente. And again, poor people working in the kitchens, people that supported Bob. And so we went out the platform, had this wonderful reception.
Let me just ask, if I may, were there a lot of non-kitchen workers in the kitchen at that time, or did the kitchen fill up later after the speech? And did you see anything, did you feel anything?
No, there's nobody in the kitchen that we knew about.
Okay.
And so went to the platform, and Bob made his victory speech, and he then confused his own bodyguard, Bill Barry, former FBI agent, who was the only gun-carrying guy on the staff. Actually lost him. So Bob was supposed to come off the front of the stage, but he on the other side, but he went off the back of the stage, being led by Carl Euchre, his escort, Assistant Major D, and they wound up down behind the platform on a lower level, the kitchen level, where his PR guy. Anyway, they got to the kitchen level behind the platform, and they talked about what to do. They were supposed to go from there down the stairwell to the embassy room. They were supposed to get downstairs to the ambassador room, where there's another 1,500 farm worker assembled to be part of the victory. And they decided at that point, based upon the media asking, to come over to the colonial room, which was a right turn rather than a left turn, which took Bob through into the pantry area, not into the kitchen, but to the pantry area, and where he was confronted. I had gotten there earlier because I knew he was coming in that direction, and was waiting for him. There was hardly anybody in there, a few kitchen workers, but it immediately filled up. And so I was standing right behind Bob at that point. I was shaking hands with Jesus Perez and Juan Romero. And I remember the looks on their faces. It reminded me of what was happening in Delano with Chavez.
So the looks on their faces were like elation?
Elation,
yeah.
And
that was contagious for you?
Yeah, it was, because it reminded me of our first meetings in Delano with Chavez. Well, I stepped back at that point because Bob said, I want you and Jess with me at the Colonial Room media conference, which was on the other end of the pantry. So I stepped back, and that's when I had turned around at that point, and that's when the television lights went on, and I was sort of blinded, and then I started shaking and went down. I didn't know I'd been shot at that point. I just thought maybe being electrocuted, so I passed out at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so then you sort of wavered in and out of consciousness?
Yeah, and a doctor was with me, he was behind me holding my head because I was bleeding. I got hit in the top of the head, the bullet went in and out, left a little part of the skull there, which they took out, so I got a really big dent up there. Anyway, I wasn't in any pain at that point, but just very weak and in and out of consciousness. The doctor says, you're going to be okay. we're taking you to Central Receiving Hospital. I said, but I'm a member of the Kaiser plan.
So was that the moment that you realized you'd been shot, or did you figure it out?
I figured that out.
Wow.
He says, you're going to be okay. And I didn't know that at that point. I didn't know Bob had been shot for a bit, but I then found out that he did. And he was shot and in pretty bad shape. Another doctor came to me and said, I said, take care of Bob, and so then and checking out what really happened in the next minutes, I found out that United Press and FBI had a statement from a guy who actually was a student and a Republican. He heard Bob say, "Is everybody okay? Is Paul all right?" And I never really believed that, but one of the doctors also told the FBI, said, Bob asked about Paul, and he said, "Paul, I just checked Paul's heart rate. He's going to be okay." And Bob closed that one eye that was open. So, well, Juan Romero was the most quoted on this because he was holding Bob. And he said, Bob said, "Is everybody okay?" Well, a young guy who was interviewed by UPI, and they wrote it, said he heard Bob say, "Is everybody okay? Is Paul all right?" And I always went with that. I never really used that at all because I wasn't really sure about it. I became more sure about it when Dr. Simon Abel, who was one of the 4 or 5 doctors that treated Bob, because he told the FBI, he said, well, Bob asked him how Paul was, and he said to Bob, "Paul's all right. I checked his heartbeat, and he's going to be okay." And that Bob closed that last open eye.
What does that mean? I mean, it touches my heart. I'm not Paul.
Yeah.
You are. What does that mean to you that he would consider?
Well, it means a lot to me that he was concerned, and that he knew that I'd been shot, and was so understanding at that point. It takes a really good person to be concerned about somebody else when he's there shot and lay dying, It just touched me very deeply to know that he felt that way. It was those kind of things that, that really get to you. And I tried to find out other things he said. When Ethel was delayed, in fact, she was pushed down when the shooting started by Rayford Johnson and Rosie Greer and Bill Barry. And when she got to Bob, Bob said, "Ethel, oh Ethel," and she says, "Bobby, you're going to be okay." And his last words were, when they were picking him up and putting him on a gurney, he says, no, don't move me. And that was it. I was always interested in what was happening in those last moments, and it's part of my study of what happened afterwards. I was in and out of consciousness, and I don't know, I never knew I was in surgery, but the next morning I woke up and Walter Reuther was there, and he told me that Bob had died that night, and I just couldn't face him at that point. I just turned away and was just couldn't handle it.
So, after that, what? I mean, you must have been much of a zombie at work.
No, I didn't go back to work. I was really in bad shape physically and emotionally. And it took me a while to get back to work, but people said, you're just too angry, depressed, you're not doing your job very well. A year or so later, I was defeated for office. I really didn't run very hard. I just decided, this wasn't for me anymore. And went back to work in the factory.
From the wide array and deep pile of assassination study materials that you have here in your lovely home, when did the fire to get involved in finding out the truth come to you?
Well, I couldn't handle anything with it. I was, just out of it, just so depressed by what happened, losing Bob. And Allard Lowenstein, who was had been a member of the Congress, a good friend of Bob's, helped write some of his speeches, came to me here, slept on our sofa, moved in across the street, worked for Jerry Brown when Jerry was running for president. Well, he said, look, there are serious questions about this case. And he said, I'm interested in finding out. He says, I've been meeting with some people, and he said, in fact, there's some people in your neighborhood here that are working on the case. I didn't know there were any questions about this. I thought it was Sirhan, and had not really understood that there's other things happening. Well, they had a photograph, a picture a friend of theirs had taken showing 2 bullet holes in the doorframe, which meant more than 8 bullets, because the police were saying one gunman, lone gunman, Bashar Sirhan, and 8 bullets he fired. And so the 2 bullets in the doorframe were more than their count.
Yes.
So that gave us some leverage at that point. Well, we did the right thing. We went to the chief of police, sat down with him, talked to him about some of the evidence we had gathered. Allard had put together some material, asked him these questions, and he said, well, look, put your questions in writing and we'll get back to you. Never heard from him.
Oh, no.
He said, send us the questions, we can't find your questions. This happened 2 or 3 times. They just fluffed it. We found out later, there was a order in the police department, do not answer Lowenstein's and Schrade's questions because it would contradict what we've been saying publicly.
An order which came from where?
From the chief.
Chief.
Yeah.
And do you think he received orders from somewhere else?
We don't know. We don't go there. We go by what we know.
Okay.
So I working with Allard, and we did a lot of investigation. I went to court a few times, once to get the evidence. We got a few photographs, that's all. We went to the police commission and asked these questions, and they said, no, we won't answer your questions, and we won't give you any information. And they decide who the police chief is going to be. They hire and fire. So that was a main defeat for us. I went to court on the basis of finding out, having an analysis of the bullet and the gun evidence that they used in the trial of Sirhan. Because Sirhan had been convicted without witnesses, without any bullet evidence, without any forensics at all, and convicted and sent to the gas chamber. And that's the way it all stood. So we went to court. Judge Robert Wenke of Superior Court here in LA adopted our application. CBS Networks out of New York had their local attorneys also filed the same application.